to go ahead and get started. I want to respect everyone's time. And so welcome to Bray School Stories. My name is Elizabeth Drembus, for those who don't know me, and I am the genealogist with the William&M Bray School Lab. In service to the Bray School Lab's mission to uncovering, documenting, preserving, and disseminating the history and the legacies of the Williamsburg Bray School, we host a monthly series on Zoom in order to share recent genealogical findings, to engage the descendant community in this work in order to broaden our understanding of the legacies. And we enlist the help of historians, genealogists, as well as the general public in furthering the conversations, as well as the research surrounding the Williamsburg Bray School. Again, the title of the monthly series is Bray School Stories. This evening's focus is the use of newspapers in genealogy, as well as in the Bray School research. So for some housekeepings, because we've just had a flurry of people join us this on Zoom. Once again, we are recording this session. It will be available later on our YouTube site. To find it, simply Google Bray School Lab YouTube. If you prefer not to be recorded, please feel free to access this later from our YouTube channel. I am so pleased that I am joined this evening by Julia Hawes. She is one of our wonderful student thought partners in the lab at Barrett House. And I'm excited that she's going to share a little bit of the work that she's undertaking for the lab. And it has to do with the use of newspapers and how we use newspapers in our research. So our monthly sessions, for those who are new to Bray School Stories, our monthly sessions are designed to spark conversation. We're on this journey, and we're pleased to welcome you along with us to this journey. Normally, I will share a slide and some information on a PowerPoint, and then we'll pause to take questions. And I invite you to share your thoughts and your comments. You can just ask a question. You can put something in the chat if you'd like. But this is really kind of, we're all part of this together, and I want you to feel part of this conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to go ahead and get started. And share it. And all right, so Bray School Stories, read all about it. Before we get too far into talking about newspapers, I do want to bring up, I just want to alert you to some things that are happening with our colleagues and also within the community, some things that you might find of interest. So the Strategic Cultural Partnerships is the division that the Bray School Lab is a part of. And in our buildings at Barrett House and Travis House, we get some fun and interesting people visiting and coming through our doors. So our SCP colleagues are taking the opportunity to sit down with some of them and ask one question with, and it's been turned into a podcast. The first one was released in December, and that was with Professor Alan Taylor from the University of Virginia. And then last month, Ron Hurst was the person that they talked with at One Question With. And so through that QR code, you can certainly get to that podcast, but you can also find podcasts on Apple, where you get your Apple products, as well as Spotify, I believe. But Maureen, if you have that link to One Question With, that would be great.
In the chat.
Oh, perfect. Great. Okay, great. I can't see the chat from where I am. So those are the two that are already available. And next month, our own Maureen Elgersman Lee sat down with Grace Helmuck, the host of One Question With, and that episode will air on Friday, February 7th. So I encourage you to engage with us in a very different way through this podcast. The conversations run roughly 15 to 17 minutes long. So it's a nice little chunk of time if you're driving to work or if you are getting dinner ready. It's an easy listen. So I encourage you to listen to those. We also have an event happening in the community here in the Williamsburg area on Saturday, February 8th at 4 o'clock at the Kimball Theater. The Rockefeller Library is presenting a free community event called the Albert Durant Picture Show. The event is free and open to the public. And for those of you unfamiliar with who Albert Durant was, he became the first licensed Black photographer operating a business in the 1940s through the 1960s in Williamsburg and provided photographic services to all city residences. This inclusive visual record produced over 5,000 images of Black and white families doing really wonderful, ordinary things at school, at events in town, and doing all manner of Williamsburg things. And so this is the first time these digital images are going to be shown to the public. And so we hope that you can join us. Again, that is on Saturday, February 8th at 4 o'clock. It's being presented by the library, but it's going to take place at the Kimball Theater right there in Merchant Square. So come out and join us if you get a chance. We'd love to see you there. And also, if you happen to know any of the people in the photographs, that would really help the library staff out a lot to just really kind of broaden that archive and broaden that history. So those are my plugs. Those are my public service announcements this evening. Let's go ahead and get started on newspapers in genealogy. So why use newspapers? We have to remember that a lot of the records that we use in genealogy came about at certain time periods, but newspapers predate a lot, if not most of them. If you think about census records starting in 1790, we have newspapers before that. If you're thinking about vital records like birth certificates and death certificates, marriage certificates, most of those really came about in the late 1800s and early 1900s. But before then, there were newspapers. And the newspapers have information in there that can really help add to our understanding of our ancestors and also help further that search. So some of the things that you can find in newspapers are things like this: birth announcements and obituaries, death notices. And when we talk about wedding announcements, it's not just that so-and-so married so-and-so. Sometimes in the newspapers, you can even find things like the description of what the bride was wearing. What kind of flowers did she carry? Who her maid of honor was and what the maid of honor wore, what mom wore, who the groomsmen were, and maybe where they decided to go on their honeymoon. And so these are things that you're not going to get just in a marriage certificate. So it kind of rounds out that picture of that we have of our ancestor. Same thing with obituaries. You're going to find the list of descendants. Who are the survivors of the family? And what was his occupation or her occupation? And where did they go to school, perhaps? If you have a death date, sometimes in the obituary, they're even going to mention a birth date, something that you wouldn't necessarily have, especially if this comes, if the announcement or the obituary is placed prior to the time when birth and death certificates were being kept. So have any of you used newspapers before and have found anything that you kind of would be willing to share out? What's been your experience of using newspapers in your family research? If anybody wants to share.
This is Teddy.
Hey, Teddy.
Yes, I have found birth announcements, wedding announcements, death notices, obituary, and criminal activity and human interest. From as little as my brother Albert, at the age of 4 or 5, being bitten by a dog, and that made the Asbury Park Press. And the dog was owned by my uncle. And in the article, it told who his parents were, Mr. and Mrs. Aubrey Ashby. Also, I found out that a couple of relatives had either been murdered or murdered someone else. And the wedding ones are absolutely wonderful to read from the 1920s, 1890s, because it gives a description of all the clothes, even the food. I even know what food that they were eating. And
Isn't
so
that awesome?
one of them in particular was the paper in Washington D.C. called the Washington Bee, And so in there, my cousins, their coming out parties, cotillions, they were very social. What church they went to, who were they visiting, when they left town, I guess so the burglars could get and rob their house. And they came to visit my grandmother up in New Jersey or New York and so forth. So a lot of activity is going on in the newspapers. And
Exactly.
so I also in mainstream newspapers, not just a lot of times people, African Americans or black people tend to think they're only going to be in black newspapers. But no, they have been in mainstream newspapers as far back as they had a newspaper.
Very good.
So I have a subscription to newspapers.com.
Nice. Very
I've
good.
had it for years. It's wonderful.
It is. And they keep adding things.
And they
Absolutely.
keep adding. Oh,
Yep.
yeah, I'm sorry. The latest thing I just found out was that in October of 1948, there was a baby contest in Asbury Park, New Jersey. And the first place baby was Barbara Wilshire. And the second place baby was Theodora Ashby,
Oh.
baby daughter of Mr. and Mrs. And you know what? Everybody on this call, how small the world. Well, I couldn't remember who Barbara Wilshire was. So my other cousin Claire had a birthday party at a hotel over there in Red Bank, New Jersey. And I went and I came in and she said, "Oh, blah blah blah. Sit, you're at that table right over there." And the woman I sat next to was guess who? Barbara Wilshire.
No. That's incredible.
And so
That's
I told
incredible.
her about the baby contest. She didn't, of course, she didn't remember. I said, "Well, you were first place, and I don't understand how that could be because I know I was a better looking baby than you."
I love it. I love it.
So anyway, I'm done.
Excellent.
I'm done.
Terrific. Thanks, Teddy. Thanks for sharing. Oh my goodness. Yes, so just like Teddy was mentioning, so much information can be found in newspapers. And even if it is during a time when vital records were available and census records are available, the newspaper stories might just round out, put a little bit of meat on the bones of those, name, date, and place type of records. So I encourage you to do that, to use newspapers in your research. I'm gonna Teddy gave a really good example of what you can find. I have one in my family that I was very lucky to find. This is out of Argos, Indiana. And in April of 1904, a woman was almost 100. And so that was my 2 times great grandmother. And they did an entire article on her and her long life. And the column was ran about a column and a half in the front page of this local Indiana paper. But because of the census records were just a little confusing and the number of people, the newspaper article kind of brought all of that together for me. It gave me her maiden name, Sarah Wright. Her married name was Gordon. It says where she was born in Greene County, Virginia, and a full date of birth, February 25th, 1811. This was amazing to me that I now had that information. Knowing that Greene County had not been in existence in 1811, I had to go back and check when Greene County was formed. It was formed in the 1830s, but it came out of Orange County. So now I have a place that even though she was in Indiana, and I knew that my mom's family had always been in Springfield, Virginia, now all of a sudden we've got a Virginia connection I didn't know about. The article went on to give her husband's name, her husband's date of death, a complete date of death. It also indicated that the house burned down and all of their family records perished. And I love the sentence where it says that, let me see if I can see it, that which prevents her from giving many of the dates which would now be quite interesting to her numerous family. And as a genealogy, your heart just kind of sinks thinking that, gosh, all those papers could have been burned, and I still don't know who her parents' names are. So one day I'll get back to it and I'll look, but I just wanted to give that as an example of exactly what Teddy was just saying, that there's just so much more information that you can find out if you are willing to go beyond just the basic records and look and use newspapers. So, so where do we find these newspapers? Teddy just mentioned newspapers.com, and it is a great, great source. You do need to subscribe to it. However, you can use it for free at SWEM Library as well as at your local library. If you go through their subscriptions, you can go and you can research and use newspapers.com. It's very easy to search. I also wanted to highlight the Rockefeller Library has digitized Virginia Gazettes, and you can search those, and you can do that for free, and you can even do that from home. And I believe Maureen's going to be able to post the link in the chat for the Rockefeller Library and the Virginia Gazette project that they have. And the Library of Virginia also has a newspaper project. It's called Virginia Chronicle. And we've got a link, we're going to put a link in the chat for that one as well. That one you can use from home and search for free. And those are going to really cover Virginia newspapers. So for those of us in Virginia, looking at Virginia Gazettes, looking for Virginia newspapers, these are really, really good sources. Beyond the Virginia borders, the Library of Congress has a project called Chronicling America, and they have digitized thousands of newspapers, and they are searchable. And that is at the Library of Congress's website, and you can even find by Googling Chronicling America. So I totally recommend that you look there. With the research that we're doing at the Bray School, I have used all of these so far. Newspapers.com, the Virginia Gazette, Library of Virginia's Chronicling Virginia, Library of Congress. I use all of it, and just back and forth, and who has what, and time periods that we need. But one other source I really wanted to bring to your attention is the Black Pearls of Genealogy. And Teddy touched on the use of African-American newspapers. And so I'm going to go ahead to the next slide so that you can see a little bit about what the Black Pearls of Genealogy website has. So I'm focusing right now on their section of newspapers. And through this QR code and also through the link in the chat, you can get to this beautiful website. It is a beautiful website, and I absolutely recommend that you visit it. They have so much information on there besides just newspapers, but African-American newspapers really like Teddy was saying, that's not the only place where African-American people are going to be able to find descendants and ancestors, but it is a pretty rich source. And on the Black Pearls of Genealogy website, they have step-by-step guides. And let me see if I can actually stop sharing for a second and maybe go live to that site, because I really want to make sure that you get to see. Let's see. Is everyone seeing that now? It says that I'm screen sharing. You see the picture?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. So if you get to the newspapers part of the Black Pearls of Genealogy website and you scroll on down, it talks about the history of Black newspapers and has some examples and some links to certain ones. And then if you go even further down, it has a step-by-step guide of going through Chronicling America. And this is one of the ones that I mentioned. But they say specifically down here to locate ethnicity press and select African-American to look for African-American newspapers. You can
It's not scrolling down though. You're in slide view and you're
okay.
still on the same slide, African American newspaper.
Yeah.
You
Oh.
haven't, the slide has not changed and you're not in full screen.
Okay, so let's see.
You're not sharing the live web page.
Okay. So let me stop sharing, and then let me go to here. Go back. Thank you for letting me know that. Okay, so share. Here we go. Share. How's that?
Yes, we see it now.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, good. Okay, so you're here at Black Pearls of Genealogy. To get there, you're going to go to Tools. You're going to drop down to Newspapers, and that's going to bring you to this site. It's going to talk about the history of African American newspapers. It's going to give some examples starting in 1827. And then there's going to be the step-by-step guide through chronicling America. And so they're going through each of the steps. You can select the state that you want to research, and then you can enter the information or the names that you're looking for as well. So they said select all states 1880 to 1950 timeframe. So you do definitely want to keep that time frame in mind as well. Also on this website, they're going to discuss runaway slave advertisements. Those are certainly factoring into the research for the Williamsburg Bray School, and we're going to have a couple examples of that. And then it shows you lower on that site how to find and locate ads that have been transcribed or have been captured. So the geography of slavery in Virginia, we use quite a bit, the Digital Library of American Slavery, and again, the Library of Congress website. And then further on down, this is their last entry, is newspapers for researching African Americans and slavery genealogy. So I definitely recommend checking out this site for research, whether it's for slavery genealogy or even just genealogy in general, 1900s, 1800s, I would suggest it. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this, and we'll go back to, well, actually, before we leave here, any questions at this point?
No. Elizabeth,
Yeah.
I'm putting in the chat because I worked on a project years ago that's now in a book. It's called Last Scene. It was a project at the Villanova University, had a project called Last Scene. And it was all based on newspaper adverts where people formerly enslaved or free people after the after the war, they put in advertisements all over the United States in various newspapers. Mostly, I think it was the Methodist newspaper. But anyway, it's advertisements, newspapers, where they're searching, they put in the ads and they describe who they're looking for and where they were last seen. That's why the name of the book is Last Scene. So I'm putting that in because that's all based on newspaper advertisements.
Thank you. Thank you, Teddy. That's a wonderful, wonderful resource for people, especially coming out of coming past the Civil War time period and into that Reconstruction era. That's such a rich time for lots of information to be shared. And so that's a wonderful resource. Yes. Anybody else? Any questions, suggestions?
And it's also at Villanova, it's also a website, and you can just plug in your names and see if you have an advertisement. So you don't have to read the book if you don't want.
Terrific. Terrific. Good. Anyone else before I stop sharing this website and we go back to talking about Bray School Scholars?
I caught just part of what I think it was Teddy was saying. I just wanted to see if she had actually put it in. It's informationwanted.org. Did she already? I don't see it in the chat, so I'll drop it in the chat. But that is the website for those last seen.
Yeah, I was still typing it up.
Okay, I've got it in there.
I'm glad you put the website in. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, I love having genealogists on the call with me. This is so helpful. Thank you both so much. All right, let's go ahead back because I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Let me go back to this and all right. No, that's not what I want. Hold on. I need to go back to this. Give me just a second, folks. Bear with me. Screen. There we go. And back in business. All right. So we've talked about African American newspapers. We've talked about where to find newspapers and why to use them within genealogical research. Now I will share just a few of the findings that we've had in the lab, specifically using newspapers and how we're using those newspapers. This one, of course, is about Bray School scholar Isaac B. Lewis Burwell placed this ad in the Virginia Gazette in September of 1774. And we see Isaac B's name here very clearly. Isaac B., and he's listed as formerly the property of the late President Blair. We know from the attendance lists in 1765 that Isaac B. was sent to the Williamsburg Bray School by President Blair. Using traditional genealogy research then at that point, we've kind of tried to figure out what's the relationship between President Blair and now Isaac B.'s enslaver, Lewis Burwell. Well, it turns out that Lewis Burwell is the grandson of President Blair. And so when Lewis Burwell mentions in the ad that Isaac could be delivered to Mrs. Burwell in Williamsburg, he may be referring actually to his mother, Christian Blair Burwell, who still lived in Williamsburg. Lewis Burwell takes over the plantation in Stoneland Plantation in Mecklenburg County. The other thing that Lewis Burwell mentions about Isaac in this newspaper ad is that his age, between 18 and 19 years of age, he thinks he has a right to his freedom because his father was a free man, and he supposes he'll endeavor to pass for one. And what we also, get a little excited about is that he states that Isaac can read, and we know that reading was taught at the Williamsburg Bray School. And so this newspaper advertisement gives us a glimpse of a little bit more about Isaac than we could ever get from just that attendance list. And so this has become one of those documents that we really lean on in our research to really look and see what was the legacy and of the Bray School. So any comments about this one? I'm sure this is definitely one I've shared before many times, but if anybody has any reflections or kind of new questions to ask about this ad, happy to talk a little bit about this. Okay, I'm going to go ahead to the next one because we also have another ad that also talks about Isaac B. That first ad was placed in 1774 by Lewis Burwell. The next time we see Isaac B. in the newspapers, it's 1793, and he is self-liberating again, this time from a Richard Littlepage. How do we know that this Isaac B. is the same Isaac B. as from 1774? The ad very clearly states that Richard Littlepage purchased Isaac from Mr. David Lambert of Richmond, but that Isaac was formerly the property of Colonel Lewis Burwell of Mecklenburg County. So we see that trajectory. We know that Isaac had been at the Bray School in Williamsburg. We know that he then went to Mecklenburg County with Lewis Burwell's family and household. And then at some point, and because we know from a bill of sale, we know that Isaac had been sold at some point to Mr. David Lambert, and then subsequently sold from David Lambert to Richard Littlepage and Samuel McCraw. And Isaac is self-liberating in 1793 from Richard Littlepage. So newspaper ads and finding Bray School scholars in newspaper ads is, it's been a big, it kind of helps fill in some of the gaps. And what we see in this description of Isaac is a lot of information about his age, kind of his physical traits, but also Richard Littlepage mentions that Isaac can both read and write. And so it gives us a little bit more insight into that education that Isaac received, not only at the Bray School, but also within his family and since the closing of the Bray School. But again, just like when Teddy was talking about how the newspaper articles just kind of give you some more information and round out some of that information, we're getting the same thing from these newspaper ads about one of the Bray School scholars. So any questions about this before we go on to the next slide? All right, so we're going to highlight the Ashby family because in these two examples from the newspapers, we don't actually have Bray School scholars Harry, John, or Mary, but we do have information about their parents. In the top ad in 1770, it is another runaway ad, but this time the person who is self-liberating is a man named Sam. And he runs away from Amelia County. And then the ad states that he pretends to lay claim to freedom and is now harbored at one Matthew Ashby's in Williamsburg. So this raises a whole lot of questions about who Sam is, how people in Amelia County might know to go to Matthew Ashby's house. Is this the first time that Matthew Ashby is kind of a safe house for people to get to? And what do we know about, Matthew Ashby was a free man of color in Williamsburg. He's well known throughout the city. And so I have so many questions about all of this. And then what happened to Sam after that? And how did Matthew Mays, the person who placed the ad, know about Matthew Ashby? How does he know that Sam's going to be there? Apparently he says, as I am informed. Who's informing him? There's so many things that this ad raises so many more questions than it does answers, but that just gives us more things to really consider when we're really looking at the Bray School story.
Yes. Well, Matthew Ashby, first of all, he was not in one spot all the time. He was out and about to read and write. He knew everybody in town and on the outskirts. And he did things for the governor, the colonial governor, the colonial governor. So he would have been part of an underground loop of information and communication. So when I knew about this years and years ago about him harboring the escaped enslaved person, I figured that out immediately, because who else would you go to? You go to somebody who can actually go through the system without being noticed. And Matthew Ashby, being a mulatto, his mother was white and his father was African. He also was light-skinned, so light-skinned people are treated differently. Matter of fact, he probably was treated as invisible. So you could stand there and he could listen and hear everything because he was like invisible, because, he was a mulatto. But then at the same time, he could read and write, and he knew how to probably play the role. So that's why Sam went to him. And before that, other people probably went to him too.
Probably.
Because he had transportation.
Right.
He had transportation. He had a horse. He had a wagon. He could cover you up in the back. Whatever. This is not rocket science. I mean, when I saw that, I knew how he got the heck he got around.
Right.
Harboring the enslaved person.
Exactly.
Okay. Anybody else want to speak?
So the other example there, and we'll just kind of briefly touch on it, Matthew Ashby ends up dying in 1771. His wife Anne is widowed, and what we know from the 1772 ad is that George Jones is now placing this ad and refers to Anne as his wife. We know that she is the widow of Matthew Ashby. He is trying to settle the estate of Matthew Ashby. And so this just gives us a little bit more information about after Matthew Ashby died, then Anne remarries. And so then when we're looking for Bray School scholars, Harry and John and Mary, are we going to look then for them with still the Ashby surname, or do they all of a sudden start taking the Jones surname, or how does that play out in some of the records? Maybe they knew to keep the Ashby surname, but Jones is what was going to be used in records. And so this advertisement gives us a little bit of information on kind of next steps and perhaps where to find them. We're going to be looking for them within the George Jones household. And so that's the use of this newspaper ad. I'm looking at the clock and I'm going to go ahead and forward to this next one. This was a newspaper article, not about a Bray School scholar. However, this was about the Burwell family at Stoneland Plantation in Mecklenburg County. And this is the newspaper article about when Stoneland burned. We heard about this fire from Miss Loretta Burwell back in July when she joined us on Bray School Stories. Lewis Burwell had died at this point, but his wife and his children, his grown children, were still living at Stoneland Plantation, and the fire happened in 1816. And Miss Loretta talked about how her ancestor was the one that caught one of the Burwell children when they jumped out of the house from the fire. So it was that corroborating evidence of the oral history tradition that Miss Loretta shared with us, and then being able to find the evidence of this in the newspaper. And while this doesn't really help us with any mention of Bray School scholars or even their family members, when we're doing the genealogy, we need to also, especially when we're looking at the enslaved and formerly enslaved, we need to focus on the white family lineage as well. And this helps know that Henry Burwell, who passed away, he had inherited the child of one of the Bray School scholars. And so then we knew to, his death date, so when or what would have happened to that descendant of a Bray School scholar that he had inherited. And so we were able to find that in the record when his estate was distributed, but we didn't know that he would have died in 1816 until we really had this newspaper article. So it really, all of this together, it's not just the newspaper, it's not just oral history, it's all of this taken together with the records that really help kind of flesh the story out a little bit and also give us some direction when we're doing the research. So I'm going to go ahead to the next slide. And this one is from Williamsburg in 1770, and this has to do with Elizabeth Prentice. And we know that the Prentice family sent Molly to the Bray School, and it was Mrs. Prentice, Elizabeth's mother, who sent Molly. But Mr. Prentice, in his will, had bequeathed Molly, Bray School scholar Molly, to his daughter, Elizabeth Prentice. And then we know in 1770, Elizabeth Prentice dies. And this is, again, a way to figure out, okay, what then became of Molly? If we know that this is a date in which an enslaver has passed away, that means that Molly's going to be moved to somebody else or somewhere else. And so this gives us some guidance as far as the timeline goes, where to look for next. And the fact that Elizabeth Prentice was 18 years old, she was not married at that time, we know that there is a good chance that Molly was absorbed back into the family. And that's exactly what happened. Her brother ends up being the new enslaver for Molly. And so then we were able to track Molly through her brother, John Prentice, and then through his family. So any questions? I know I've kind of picked the pace up a little bit. I want to make sure that Julia has enough time to talk. I'm going to skip pretty quick over the next one, but if any questions, any comments, any suggestions, reflections on this? No? Okay. So the last example I have is one that I just recently came across. I haven't completely tied it yet to the Burwell family of Mecklenburg County, but what struck me about this ad, this is a slave sale advertisement. And this is coming out of a Chancery Court suit in which one person owes a debt to someone else. And so that someone else needs to sell some assets. And in this case, it's not only land that's being sold, but also enslaved people. And while that is beyond kind of our comprehension in our kind of day and age, the benefit of this newspaper ad, and the reason why I wanted to bring it as an example, is that you have the names of the enslaved. Many times if there's a slave sale, we don't get the names, but in this particular one, we have names, and not only names, but we have some relationships. We have Sarah and her child Sal. We have Fanny and her child Billy. We even have Dick the blacksmith and Tenor his wife. So in some of these newspaper ads, you're going to be able to find names of people, names of enslaved people. And this is from 1823. So this is beyond the time that the tax records would have listed those names. Perhaps in the Chancery Court records, these names would have also been found, but here they are in a newspaper ad. So again, we haven't really tied this directly to our research. These, we don't even know if these particular enslaved people were part of the land that was, and the property that was purchased from Mr. Roots, who is the one who ends up needing to pay a debt. But we know that he purchased land from Lewis Burwell. We don't know whether he had originally purchased enslaved people from Lewis Burwell. But we know at this point, these folks are going to be sold. So right now we have their names right here in the newspaper. So it's just another example of why it's really important. Kind of keep honing in on this. It's really important to use newspapers in the research, because these are just the types of things that can be found, and this is the types of ways that they can be used. So, any questions before I introduce Julia, and she takes it from here? No? All right. So, Miss Julia, welcome to Bray School Stories, and thank you for being here with us.
Thanks for having me. I am really excited to be here and to tell you all a little bit about what we've been doing with the Virginia Gazette in the lab. So, as Elizabeth mentioned, I am a student thought partner with the lab, so I'm an undergraduate at William & Bray. And I've been a student thought partner for about 3 years. And for all 3 of those years, I have been working on transcribing the Virginia Gazette. So when we started this project, our main goal, we did not have a genealogist yet. So our main goal was to kind of contextualize the lives of our scholars by transcribing every mention of an enslaver of a Bray School scholar in the Gazette from the years 1760 to 1774, so during the school's operation. And since then, we're also hoping that some of our transcriptions can be useful for Elizabeth in not having to sort through the scanned microfilm of Virginia Gazettes.
Yes.
And so in genealogical research, as we've been talking about, we see things like runaway ads, like auction notices. We also see things like deaths, births, and marriages of enslavers as important times that enslaved people are often moving. And so those are all interesting and important. And those are the places where we have traditionally looked for enslaved people in white newspapers, as the Virginia Gazette very much was. And then next slide.
Okay, great.
Yes. So, but as I said, kind of contextualizing the lives of our scholars, we can take a broader approach. And we have been taking a broader approach to reading the Gazette. So despite Clementina Rhine's declaration that her Gazette is open to all parties but influenced by none, all of the contributors to the Gazette or pretty much all of the contributors to the Gazette are white. And so we know that at least one enslaved man, Dick, is helping to print her version of the Gazette. And as I should say, if you're not familiar with the Gazette, it's not really one newspaper. It's more that every newspaper in 18th century Virginia is called the Gazette. So you really have like many different newspapers operating under the same name at the same time. Fortunately, they're now easy to search through on the Rockefeller Library database. They've done a really good job of digitizing them and of putting together a very thorough index, which we use in our research. So, but to return to what we find in them, the Gazettes contain all manner of international news, local news, what you might kind of consider gossip, opinion pieces, debates. I like to think of them more as like a Facebook group or a neighborhood listserv than as the sort of investigative journalism we might associate with a newspaper today. So they are really like one of the main ways that information is being spread. But like I said, enslaved people are not contributing to them, and they aren't being explicitly mentioned very often, except in runaway ads, which appear quite frequently, or in auction notices. And so if we want to use these to understand the lives of our scholars, we have to take a more creative approach to reading them. And so in doing that, we're drawing on a lot of recent scholarship about archival silences. And I find Tessa Murphy's sort of framing of this issue particularly useful. In her book, The Creole Archipelago, she's writing about indigenous and enslaved people in the Caribbean. And she tells us that although Europeans authored most of the documents historians rely on, the ways that we interpret those documents does not have to hew to the logic of the archives they created. And so when we're reading the Gazette, I think this kind of invites us to consider, not only the people who are explicitly named in the newspaper, but their entire network, including the people they're enslaving. So when I was researching the John Blair household, he is publishing in 1766 he's mentioned in and publishing all of these articles relating to a murder trial that he's wrapped up in as a judge. It's a great story. I recommend you look into it, the Chiswell murder. But most interestingly, there's among all of these very prominent white Virginians who are wrapped up, there's also Chiswell's man who is sent to fetch the murder weapon and who potentially is the right age to be a Bray School scholar, because we know that Colonel Chiswell is sending a young man to the Bray School, and he would be about the right age to be this man mentioned in all these articles. And so is that child then talking about this murder case with the children John Blair is sending to the Bray School? I mean, everyone else is talking about it in town, so it's hard to imagine that they wouldn't be. And so I think when we start to look more expansively about how is this news being, disseminated both through the newspaper and then through gossip, through conversation, how are these laws that are being published, these debates that are happening in the newspaper, how are these impacting the wider Williamsburg community? Who all is forming opinions about them, is hearing them and is being impacted by them? That certainly includes our scholars, even though they are not explicitly named. So to kind of to wrap up and to sort of demonstrate the range of things we're finding, kind of the next slide. I'll close with two interesting articles from the Jane Vobe household, which I was working on last year. So in 1768, Jane Vobe publishes a very traditional runaway ad. She tells us that Nanny, a woman of about 35 years old, has self-liberated. This is what I really like. It is supposed that she has gone off with some of the comedians who have just left town. So I think that's wonderful that Nanny has joined a troupe of comedians. And as far as we know, I haven't looked into this extensively, but as far as I have found, Nanny remains free. We know that she had two children who were baptized at Bruton Parish, who she does not seem to have taken with her. And we know that she lived in a household with two Bray School scholars, Sal and Jack. And so I think in this runaway ad is really interesting for demonstrating both, that the impulse to freedom is not constrained to people like Isaac B., who are having access to education and to the ideas of the Bray School, but also, that impulse is coming from women like Nanny as well, and that she is having that impact on Sal and Jack. And so, but this is the kind of the place we traditionally look for enslaved people, is runaway ads. Whereas on our next slide, we have a different sort of article. We see that there are some portraits on exhibit at Mrs. Vobe's. Some very famous artists have been copied. And so we can read this as an invitation to white Virginians to come and display their cultural knowledge, to see and be seen, to, display their wealth as potential purchasers of these portraits. That is how it is intended to be read by the author, probably. But Sal and Jack also live in this household. They're also seeing these portraits, and they are also forming opinions about them. And so I think this is a really good example of how, as we've been talking about, newspapers can be really important for sort of filling in the details, for imagining lives more broadly, and for telling us, in the case of our Bray School scholars, what's going on outside the walls of the school. And so that, those are my two examples for today. We have nearly 500 articles transcribed now, and we are still working on this. There are a number of student thought partners involved in the project, and I think the project, since it's not done, it's not on our website or anything yet, but I believe we are working on some ways for people to kind of be able to come into the lab to access it if that is helpful.
Thanks, Julia. I just want to add that, yes, so if people are interested in accessing the information, just send me an email and we can set up an appointment to go through it. Because it's not complete yet, we don't have it, and we don't really have the information analyzed right now. We're just doing the gathering of the information, and the students are it's really amazing. It's on a big Excel spreadsheet at this point. And all I have to do is say, okay, wait a second. I've got a Bray School scholar who was purchased. It was Roger was purchased by David Ross. I don't know anything about David Ross. Can you look up him in the Virginia Gazette? And then like somebody is assigned to look for all the David Ross articles, just so I can find any information about who this guy is, where Roger might be going, what kind of work Roger might have been hired to do, or purchased in order to do. And so, and yes, the Blair household, especially when you're talking about some of the upper crust of Williamsburg society, there's going to be a lot of mentions of them, maybe in direct relation to either Bray School or scholars. Most often it's the rest of their life that is also on display in the newspaper as well. So I can definitely speak to how the work that the students are doing and the hours that they are pouring into this, going through these digitized newspapers and just looking for those elusive entries for some of these information of these people that are associated with the Bray School. Their work is amazing, and much credit and kudos to them. So Julia, thank you so much for being there. Does anyone have any questions or comments they'd like to raise either to me, to Julia? We've got about 10 minutes left of our time together this evening. I'm happy to actually stop sharing and open up the conversation a little bit. What do we think?
Elizabeth, we do have a question in the chat from Janice Kennedy.
Okay.
And Janice, did you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Good evening. I was just asking when Julia, is that her name?
Yep.
Was talking about the particular ad and about the Chiswell buck trout situation. Did it, I was listening to what you were saying, and I know we want to know about the connection to scholars, but since we're talking about a child who could have very well been a scholar, who could have been a student at the school, do we lend our minds to the trauma that that child was experiencing in that situation, if they witnessed something, if they knew what they were going to get, and possibly knew what it was being used for? So I'm just thinking about the trauma that's done in day-to-day life to these students as well, not just the learning.
Yeah, I mean, I have not done a lot of research on this case in particular, sort of beyond reading it in the newspapers. And Nicole told me a lot about it when I first encountered it, actually. So one of the things that's really interesting about the case is that it is very well documented. It's actually the first time we see like a diagram, like a crime scene diagram in a newspaper. And so we know that the man initially refuses to go get the sword. Colonel Chiswell is very drunk. He's saying, "I'm going to kill this guy." So the man initially refuses to go get the sword. And then Chiswell threatens to kill him. And then
Mhm.
so, but yeah, beyond that, I mean, this is the realm where we kind of have to let our imaginations and our sort of empathy take over.
Thank you.
Thanks, Janice.
Mm-hmm.
It is a good reminder of, you know, the humanizing piece of this.
Yeah.
When we're reading this in the ad and when we're reading anything in the newspaper, just kind of like that humanizing part of it. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
good reminder for all of us. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, any other comments or questions from this evening? There was a lot of information kind of thrown at you about newspapers. Any surprises, anything that, or any other suggestions of other places to find newspapers or other uses of newspapers? Kind of got a quiet group this evening.
It really is quiet. It's like unnerving. Are they there? Are these
Yeah.
people there for real?
So, so
I know I said it in the chat, but I just wanted to say thank you, Elizabeth and Julia, for your time. It's always interesting being here and listening, and I'm really excited for this series and the next one to come next month.
thanks. So, okay, so we have a question. Did people pay to have certain events posted in the newspaper as we do nowadays? Julia or Nicole, do you know the answer to that question?
Yes. It's not free.
It's not free, right, right. So I don't know what counted it. I mean, I think they certainly were paying for placing runaway ads for sure. And it's interesting when you see the same ad running 2 or 3 weeks in a row in about the same place, not changing the language, but it's run several times. So, but as far as the information on something like a murder case, I don't know whether that's something that the court's paying for or whether that's the printer is deciding that that's of interest. Julie, do you have any?
I don't know. I know for for any advertisement there is a fee, and then for government business, which is being published in whoever is the official printer at the time. I don't know the details of the financial situation there actually.
Well, first of all, Julia, the murder thing would be a news story.
Yeah, so they're
gonna print it so they can sell some newspapers.
Yeah, well, so that's part of it, but okay, yes, Janice has suggested a good source in the chat, but with the murder, part of what's being published is these like constant critiques of various people's behavior. So it's much more like a debate. So Blair is publishing a lot of defenses of himself because he is being accused of corruption.
Yes. And and also I said something about the Methodist Church. They had a newspaper. They were the ones who actually started maybe the first major last scene advertisements. They were like the dumping ground for those ads. And I don't know if they always paid the Methodist church paper. I forget what it's called. So that may have been free. Mm-hmm. But all the rest of those newspapers, the people paid.
And Teddy, when you're talking about the Methodist paper, are you talking about AME or?
Yeah, the AME, African Methodist. That's them.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm an Episcopalian, so I don't know much about them.
Well, you and me both.
When I was working with Judith years ago, when we started that last scene, she needed volunteers, and I remember that was the AME newspapers.
Right. Right.
That's it.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, folks, if there's not I'm certainly happy to hang out. We've got, a couple more minutes, but I love the conversation that we've had tonight. I've enjoyed I'm reading through the chat right now, but if there isn't anything more, I think we can kind of call it an evening. Oh, somebody wants to know, Julia, are you a history major? What is your major?
Yes, I am a history major and a religious studies minor.
Oh, wow, wonderful. Glad to have you on board.
Well, so folks, thank you so much to everyone who's joined us this evening. We're excited to have you be a part of this. And we will be back with a new session next month, Monday, February 24th, same time, 6 o'clock in the evening. But please stay in touch with us. If you can, for the latest news and happenings from the Bray School Lab, please be sure to check out our website and sign up to receive our weekly Bray School Bulletins newsletter. And we hope to see as many of you from Williamsburg at the event on February 8th at Merchant Square at Kimball Theater. So thank you all very much for coming and joining us this evening. And I wish you a good evening and a good rest of your week. Thank you.